In the Pokemon TCG, deck building is one of the most important skills, especially at the top levels of competitive play. It is often the players making the best and most effective innovations that find success at major tournaments. And although this is a long-lasting fact about the game, I'm sure a lot of you guys probably aren't aware of how innovations are possible and why they end up working more often than not. So today, I'm going to share with you guys some secrets about deck building innovation and examples of how they come together. So let's talk about it. First, I think it's important to explain exactly what I'm talking about when I say innovations. In simple terms, a deck building innovation in Pokemon is a piece of technology that either upgrades a deck by fixing problematic matchups or fixing problems with the nature of the deck itself. These innovations come in many forms, and I have examples of pretty much all of them from recent Pokemon TCG history. First is a story that some people probably are aware happened, but most casual players probably don't know the purpose of this tech card. Gholdengo EX has been a staple of competitive Pokemon for almost a year now. Its ability Coin Bonus draws extra cards each turn, and its attack Make It Rain can scale up to one-shot any Pokemon in the game for 1 energy attachment so long as you discard enough energy cards from your hand. Once Energy Surge Pro released in Surging Sparks, and once Charizard EX was phased out of the meta by Bidoof in 2025, there was a 2-month stretch where Gholdengo EX was one of, if not the best deck in the game. American players teamed up and brought a Gholdengo EX deck to EUIC 2025, and Xander Perot got top 4 at the event with the 60 that these players shared. It was the perfect surprise deck for this tournament. Players hadn't been practicing their Gholdengo matchup, and it just so happened that Gholdengo could boast favorable matchups into Dragapult and Gardevoir and Miraidon and Terapagos, all top decks at the time, so long as it's set up. The only questions were really the Raging Bolt matchup, which relied heavily on luck with your opening hand, the Snorlax matchup, which was just decided to be taken as an auto loss, judging by their list, and the Lugia matchup, which could go either way. However, Raging Bolt usage was lower than ever after flopping at Merida. Snorlax was horribly positioned versus all of the top 4 decks, and Lugia's inconsistencies and poor matchup into Miraidon scared many people off of it. However, there was one problematic matchup for Gholdengo that arose after EUIC. Gholdengo. Wait, Gholdengo? Isn't it just a straight mirror match with a 50-50 win rate? How is this a problem? Well, here's a little secret about the Gholdengo mirror match that every Gholdengo player needs to know. In the Dango mirror, the first player to put a 2-prizer into play usually loses. It's a bit more complicated and can be skewed by bench management and Scizor as a 1-prize attacker, but the long and short of it is that you want to keep your board as just 1-prize Pokemon until you can take a 1-prize knockout on the opponent's Gholdengo board with a 1-prize board yourself. If that sounds complicated, I don't know the best way to explain it. Basically, if you take a KO on a Gimmighoul, for example, and your board is filled with 1-prize Pokemon, your opponent is forced to take a 1-prize knockout and not a 2-prize one. Then, if they take a knockout, you just evolve into Gholdengo and knock something out, putting you ahead in the prize race no matter what. And if they don't take a knockout, you can evolve, take the knockout, and be up 4-6, putting you in position to win the game. The main way to attack in these lists was Radiant Greninja as a 1-prize attacker, since they played 2 water energies and Earthen Vessel, meaning you could use Moonlight Shuriken to take 2 prizes with a 1-prize board or a 2-prize board and push yourself ahead enough to win the game. But Gholdengo players then started teching Manaphy for the mirror match, and since they caught Canceling Cologne, this line was way less relevant. So what would you do in this situation? You need to keep your board 1-prizers, but also have a consistent and efficient way to take a 1-prize KO on anything in the active spot that isn't a 2-prizer. At EUIC, Jack Kincaid found the solution. This Gholdengo card from Surging Sparks is not very good. Its first attack does 120 damage for 1 metal energy, but it only does 120 damage if the Pokemon evolved from Gimmighoul this turn. Normally, this card would never be played in Gholdengo because if you're attacking with a 1-prizer, you can just use either Monkey Dory or Radiant Greninja to attack, and if you need to take a KO, you just use Gholdengo EX. However, Baby Dango proved that it was the only consistent solution to solve the mirror match. By attaching metal to the active Gimmighoul, and then using either Arven for Ultra Ball or just Ultra Ball and attacking with Baby Dango, you can guaranteed take the first 1-prize KO with a 1-prize board. And next turn you can simply switch out with either an extra energy attachment from a Gimmighoul's minor errand running or by using Switch. With Baby Dango aiding in the mirror match, Gholdengo players at Vancouver had a situation every deck builder dreams of. A deck with almost exclusively good matchups into the meta. Lucas Zing piloted this list to 2nd at Vancouver Regionals, ultimately losing to Andrew Hedrick's Dragapult Dusknoir in the finals. Although it doesn't seem like much of an innovation, Baby Dango effectively gave the builds with it a favored matchup into almost every other Gholdengo EX deck without it. And with Gholdengo being about 9% of the Vancouver metagame, and with most lists being built off the EUIC list without Baby Dango, it proved to be the perfect innovation at just the right time. That actually leads me into a huge point about deck building innovations. It's never usually just about what you play to a tournament, but when you play the card. If Baby Dango was commonplace at Vancouver, this tech wouldn't give that big of an edge to the players with it. But with most of the player base unaware of the purpose of this card, the Baby Dango players converted into Day 2 with incredible consistency, and soon after this tournament, Baby Dango became a staple in the Gholdengo EX archetype for months to come. That story had more to do with a single tech card that fixed a problematic matchup, but how about a deck engine upgrade that saved one of the best cards ever made? Charizard EX is undoubtedly one of the most broken Pokemon ever. 330 HP, dark typing hitting Mew VMAX and Gardevoir EX for weakness, a broken ability that accelerates 3 fire energy onto your board, and an attack that's cheap and gets stronger the longer the game goes on. It's clear Pokemon wanted Charizard EX to be good. However, it wasn't, at least not at first. Part of this is the phenomenon where new threatening Pokemon get teched for extra hard despite not totally being necessary, just because the matchup hasn't been tested enough. A perfect example is at NAIC this year, where Picnic Basket and Iron Leaves EX grew heavily in popularity to slow down Marnie's Grimmsnarl, the most threatening new deck heading into NAIC, despite the techs not always being necessary to win the matchup. So Charizard came out and immediately players tech for it. You saw superior V-Star in Arceus V-Star decks as a way to one-shot Charizard. Mew VMAX adapted by spamming 4 copies of Judge and 4 copies of Path to the Peak to slow down Charizard, and grass coverage suddenly became the hottest commodity to slow it down. So the first tournament came and went, and Charizard was just okay. Very mid. However, part of the reason it wasn't working was the deck's consistency. Players building Charizard decks used high counts of draw supporters like Professor's Research and Iono, just praying that they drew into what they needed on the turn they needed it. However, it wasn't until a list from Japan surfaced with a supporter card engine that was largely unexplored that Charizard became one of the best decks in the game, and this card became one of the best of all time. Arven. Arven searches the deck for a tool card and an item card. Charizard decks like to play Battle VIP Pass to fill their bench with Charmanders and Pidgey in order to evolve into Charizard and Pidgeot EX, whose quick search ability can fetch any card from the deck. However, with no consistent way to find your basics or rare candy, the draw supporter build relied too much on luck to find its footing. However, Arven killed 2 birds with 1 stone. It served as extra outs to Battle VIP Pass and rare candy, making it more versatile and useful in the early and mid game. When Counter Catcher released in Paradox Rift, players now could use Arven to find that too, giving them more outs to a key Gust on a key turn. And with 4 Seal Stone and the additions of Rotom V and Lumineon V, turn 1 consistency was at an all-time high. Charizard could often completely fill their board on turn 1, going second with just a single use of Arven. And Rotom V's instant charge provided great additional setup for after turn 1 to hopefully draw into what you needed to swing the following turn. Turn 2 Charizard became the norm. With this new look, Charizard went on to win a regional championships and the European International Championships. None of this would have been possible without the Arven engine. And after Charizard's dominance, Arven became the go-to setup supporter in Standard. And nowadays, any deck that needs to set up can find value in Arven no matter what. Now, it wouldn't be a deck building innovation video without talking about the Baltimore Regional Championships from 2024, where not 1, but 2 innovations stole the show at this event. First, Henry Chow's Gardevoir EX deck won the event, but this Gardevoir list was different from the standard Gardy list at the time. Most standard lists of Gardevoir dropped the rare candy item card after the rotation of Shining Arcana Gardevoir in April 2024. With Shining Arcana gone, players didn't feel the need to get Gardevoirs out on turn 2 for big attacks anymore, and could instead rely on Arven, TM Evolution, Iono, and Counter Catcher as not only consistency, but also a big comeback deck. However, Henry Chow looked at the metagame for this event and realized that Gardevoir couldn't thrive in the format without being more turbo. Regidrago V-Star is arguably the best deck in the game after its dominant showing at Worlds, with Lugia V-Star, Charizard, and Raging Bolt all being respectable top-tier decks at the time. Henry Chow knew that Regidrago V-Star's Curum's Trifrost pressure, that's a mouthful, was too much to handle if you were playing the standard TM Evo builds of Gardevoir, since Regidrago could just Trifrost your 2 evolved Kirlia, leaving you with only a Ralts or 2 and no rare candy to get into a Gardevoir. So, instead of using TM Evo as the primary setup option, Henry pivoted to rare candy again. This could be enough to solve the Drago matchup, since if you got 4 Ralts down, Trifrost could KO only 3 of them and leave the 4th one available to rare candy, thus allowing you to respond with Drifloon on their Drago V-Star and have a decent chance at winning the prize trade. This was only possible because of Fezandipity EX and the secret box Ace Spec card. Fez meant you could still draw cards after being hit by Trifrost, and Secret Box made the turn 2 Candy Gardevoir a real play. Although not the best way to play the deck on paper, it turned out that for this event, Turbo Guardy was just what was needed to keep up in the meta and ultimately win the tournament. However, that wasn't the only innovation at this tournament. And this next one wasn't as much an innovation, but more so a meta call, which is still technically an innovation. The consensus best decks in the game were clear at the time: Regidrago, Charizard, and Raging Bolt. So, Canadian players, seeing this, came up with one of the most absurd decks I've ever seen. This deck only played Cornerstone Mask Ogerpon EX and Noivern EX. Ogerpon has an ability making it immune to damage from Pokemon that have an ability, which meant it could completely wall Regidrago V-Star and Charizard EX in the right circumstances. Noivern EX has the Covert Flight attack, making it immune to damage from basic Pokemon, which just automatically beat Raging Bolt since they only played basic Pokemon. Remember how I said timing is important for innovations? Well, this was the ultimate example of that. Gardevoir usage was the lowest it had ever been, and while Lugia was good versus wall decks, inconsistencies in the deck plagued it and scared many players off, as it always does. And the Canadian players concluded that if they could dodge Lugia and Gardevoir, they could win the whole event. Nolan Randall of this testing group hit a ton of Charizard, Regidrago, and Raging Bolt on his way to top 8 of the event. Unfortunately for Nolan, however, the Gardevoir and 3 other Lugias in top cut meant his run would end there. Still, this goes to show how important timing is with making innovations in the meta. Once the meta evolved, this deck proved that it was a one-event wonder, with no major tournament success comparable to this event. I hope today's video has taught you a few things about the landscape of Pokemon TCG deck building, and despite me not covering all the wonderful innovations made over the years, I hope the ones I shared today prove to you all that even with the same resources, players can still think outside the box.